Hello, my noble band of outlaws. Outlaw Samurai coming at you live with a video. Well, saw some of the latest videos, you know that my poor phone decided to crack. And this is the first video made with the new phone. Now, I am going to keep the old phone, of course, and I'm going to kind of make it into like a filming project while I get it repaired and use it for shorter films. But in any case, today we are going to do the review of the Shadow Dancer T-Rex katana. Now, I have no idea how good the audio quality pickup is on this thing. I didn't check before. But when has not knowing what I'm doing ever stopped me on this channel? Alright, so first of all, if you look up Shadow Dancer on Amazon, you can pick this up for $128. Again, it's supposed to either be 65 MN or 9260 spring steel, according to what I and Outlaw Pimp looked up. And also, it is probably also still under the label of crucible steel. Now, for 128 bucks, you do get a very decent sword that is well made, in my opinion, despite Shadow Dancer's reputation. I like how fluently this records as well. As I mentioned before, there is oil stains in the blade from the factory. These were not made by me in the cutting process. Everything is still tight. Again, under the restrictions of what I'm able to cut and do with this thing, nothing should really be coming undone. And if it does come undone, well, then that's a major price unjustifier to me. The blade length is around 27 to 26 inch Nagasa. The Habaki's brass. I do like the wave pattern, and if I was going to buy this myself, I think I would name this sword the Ebony Wave, just because of the ebony chestnut-like color pattern that the sword possesses. It is very light and nimble and has good tip control. In fact, I would venture to say that this is something I would easily be able to manipulate one-handed if I had to. Probably more in a daisho set, with this being my wakizashi or kodachi. As I said before, overall, during the cutting performance, it wasn't that bad of a cutter. In fact, it actually surpassed the Hanban. And this does have a keener edge than the Hanban did. But, as I mentioned before, I did have to kind of flick cut it, because it does have one problem when it comes to cutting, and that is the tip is too light. Alright? When I hold this thing, most of the weight that I feel is concentrated towards the tsuba. And with this thing having a sub 5 inch balance from the Habaki, which on Japanese swords I don't measure the balance from the guard, I measure it from where the actual blade begins. And with a sub 5 inch blade balance, that means that there's more weight concentrated towards the hand, which does make the tip lighter and gives you more control. Good for like a sparring or dueling blade, because you'll definitely want more tip control in a sword that is made to move fast and designed to be more of a dueling blade, in my opinion. But for cutter, you want that extra little bit of weight in the tip. And I do tend to prefer tip-heavy blades because the way I move my sword is in a combination of the way long swords and montante along with katanas are used. So I do tend to like to rely on centrifugal force and the buildup of momentum to keep my sword going and to power my attacks. And while this sword does have a very light tip and very fast and nimble, and I could probably get some very accurate thrusts out of it, it's not heavy enough to get through more substantial targets on its own unless you know what you're doing. Like I said yesterday, I had to basically flick cut it. Basically throw the blade out to allow the edge to bite in deeper on the pool noodle. Now, closer to down here in the slightly above halfway beginning of upper third of the blade, that was not an issue. Cutting down here was far more easy because there was more weight behind the blade to make the cut. But because of how light and nimble this sword is, it's not a heavy cutter. At most, I would say water bottles, pool noodles definitely if you want to kind of test your skill, and maybe tatami mats if you have them available. But stuff like hard dried bamboo and the harder, more substantial cutting targets out there, I really wouldn't recommend for this. So overall, it's a very good sword, and the one that I would, and people that I would recommend buying this blade for would actually be closer to the beginner novice level because of how much tip control you have. You're able to direct the blade where you want it to without having to worry about the blade carrying you along with it. And what I mean by that is, anyone who's ever swung like an axe, like a splitting maul before, you know that when you come down with that thing, it can easily, the momentum of the splitting maul can easily pull you forward if you don't have the proper stance and experience using it. A similar situation can be with a sword. In some instances where people will go to cut, they will swing the sword so hard and so fast that their own momentum, their own body weight will actually pull them forward further than what they intended to go. And in some instances, you can't really stop the sword in time, and you can even overswing, and instead of getting that perfectly clean cut where you stop at your waist, you can easily overswing, and the tip of the blade could be perpendicularly vertical to the ground. Basically end up like this. But because of the fact that this thing has such a well balanced and light blade, even if you wanted to, let's say, the line from my head will be the cutting target. Even if I wanted to, I can and I am not lightly throwing these cuts. I am throwing a full power intended cut, but stopping it short. And And that's only capable because of how light this blade is. It can easily be stopped mid-cut by a swordsman. Now, a beginner may not be able to do that as readily as I am able to, or any other swordsman that has practiced cutting, but this would be a very good blade. As I keep saying, this is a very good blade for a beginner because of the way it's constructed. It allows a beginner to cut without A, becoming fatigued, and B, allowing them to have good tip and point control. But there's also a drawback to this. Because of how light the blade is and how easy it is to keep the point on target, if you were to give them a heavier sword later on, I don't have one out here with me at the moment, but I do have a good analog. Yes, I know it's a Warhammer, but it will fulfill the role here. As we can see, I don't know how well you can see because of how good this camera is at autofocusing, but I'm having a much harder time keeping the point of the hammer on target. Now, obviously with the Warhammer this is exaggerated, but it can still be done with the tip of a sword. A sword that is more blade heavy, more tip heavy if you will have a harder time keeping on target, and will also be harder to aim because of the weight distribution. Anyone who's ever swung sledgehammers and axes know that just a slight, minute twist of the arm can throw the hammer or the axe completely off target. Just a little twist of the wrist is all it takes. And that's also the same in swordsmanship. Because do not worry, the blade is not damaged. Listen, learn there. Sorry, sword pimp. But there is no damage nor glinting of the blade. I think what happened is that the spine hit it. But without doing that again, as we can see, even though I'm moving my arms in the same up and down motion, just by twisting my wrist, I can throw the entire cut offline and I can take the blade off the center line. Because of this, heavier blades can easily you can easily turn your wrist without realizing it in an attempt to lessen wrist fatigue and pain. And because of this phenomena, swords that have very good tip control are good for beginners to learn the basics, but they should also be given swords that are less easy to control as their skill progresses. Essentially being that no matter what's the ultimate goal of any swordsman should be, no matter the blade you pick up, you should be able to use it within a few minutes of swinging it. Now that I've gotten through all that and we had that little heart scare where my heart literally jumped a beat, overall the fit, finish, everything on here is actually, I would say, higher quality than $128. This even has less sire rattle than some of the $500 swords I own. It also retains the sword quite nicely. You also see the ebony burgundy speckle style with some golden speckles. I am Jorge, I make the speckle. Any of you who watched Encanto know that meme. But in any case, was it Encanto? I don't know, Disney makes so many damn movies, most of them are horrible, but Encanto wasn't. It was a good one. In any case, overall, while I do have my personal biases against the company, they do make a good product. Now, as I did not buy this sword myself, I do not have many criteria to make. And most of the criteria that I would change, and the things that I would change about this sword, is stuff that anyone who's watched my channel for a long period of time know what I would change in a heartbeat. Make the blade a little longer, make the suka a little longer, and make the whole thing a little heavier. The sword also goes in and out of the scabbard quite nicely. There's no real bumps or anything to stop it just gliding in. Now, again, it also does still have the shittadome, or as I like to call them, the shitty dome, because they're never glued in, and they're not glued in now. And if you don't glue these things in, then if you take the Sageo apart, they're just going to scratch the thing all to hell. All of my katanas that I've bought in the past, the first thing I do with the saya is immediately take the Sageo off and take the shitty dome off. But yeah, overall there's not anything really negative I can say about this. This is a solid blade for what it is. But the Shadow Dancer debacle does make me hesitant about purchasing one of these myself. After all, if they're lying to you about a higher quality steel than 9260 or 65 MN, then how do we definitely know for certain that this is 9260? It may be 5160. It may be 1045. It may be 1095. We don't know, without taking a chunk out and sending it off to getting analyzed, which, if it was me, I'd just cut a little chunk off the tang and send it in, because I ain't taking a chunk off the blade. You can always weld a little bit of extra steel at the end of a tang. But, yeah, that's pretty much all I have. I would recommend this sword for a beginner. It's light, it's nimble, it's easy to use. It's not going to break your bank, and it is a budget-conscious blade, which means you can get one of these and have a good sword that you could basically do all of your traditional backyard cutting needs, water bottles, pool noodles, maybe the occasional tatami mat or two. Just keep in mind that it does still need a bit more sharpening, just really honing that edge from what I can tell. And the last thing that should be noted is that this thing, while a good sword, is at the same time a little difficult to use, especially if you have never wielded a blade before, and it's because of how light the blade is. Generally speaking, as I said before, while it is a very light and nimble tip, it also requires you, that also is a drawback, because on sturdier targets like tatami mats, because of how light and nimble the tip of the blade is, which is where you're doing 90% of your cutting to begin with, you actually have to put a little bit more force into it in order to get it to do the same kind of cutting as a wider, heavier tatami laser blade would. That's why most competition cutting swords tend to be thin and wide and just slightly on the heavier side. But yeah, if you know what you're doing, this could be a great sword, and it won't break your bank at $128 plus shipping and tax, of course. Plus, very useful for a beginner to learn and get better at. And honestly, if you're looking for a Kodachi style blade, at least this is what I would consider a Kodachi style blade, this could also be very useful for you. And this could also, and if you buy two of these, you could get two, you can actually start to practice dual wielding, because the way I dual wield is different than most other people, because simply put, I just don't get the appeal of using a small and a short blade together. But let me know what you think down in the comments below, and until next time, I know we'll band about Laws Outlaw Samurai. Tell all y'all be crazy rednecks. Be safe and use your weapons. I'm out. Peace. And hope you enjoyed this rambly Shadow Dancer T-Rex sword review.